Since our thoughts, our thought patterns, and our beliefs create our life experiences, it becomes important to recognize when our thinking becomes distorted. This series explores the terms and thought patterns from Section 6 of our Spiritual Nutrition. By learning to recognize these patterns within ourselves, and by realigning our thinking with divine truth, we can begin to stop repeating the learned patterns that create negative outcomes, and gradually, we begin to experience greater peace in our lives. In this video, we will explore two related thought patterns from Section 6, War, Evil. This set explores how unresolved negative thoughts, attitudes, emotions, resentment, and the refusal to recognize personal responsibility can expand from individual behavior into collective harm. War illustrates these patterns on a larger scale. What begins as resentment, entitlement, dehumanization, or demand to get what we want can become coercion and violence when it is acted out collectively. Evil describes the cruel, mean, and nasty thoughts, words, and deeds that can arise from unresolved issues and traumas, without removing personal responsibility for the choices we make. War, core pattern. To fully understand why war exists, we must acknowledge the negative thoughts, attitudes, and emotions within ourselves, and recognize that they can cause us to behave in negative ways. Holding a grudge against someone is the first step toward war on a personal level. We may justify our feelings by saying that the person we resent deserves it, because somehow they are less than human. They do not deserve our respect. They deserve to suffer. At a larger scale, leaders may want what they want when they want it, and simply take it. When someone stands up and says they cannot have it, that conflict can become a collective struggle. A population can be dragged into the fury, and the leader may say it is for the citizens' benefit, while acting from self-aggrandizement. Another society may then be forced to take on the role of parent to stop them. How it manifests. War manifests when resentment, entitlement, control, dehumanization, and the desire to make others suffer move from thought and attitude into action. The pattern can operate at different levels, from violating another person's property, to controlling or attempting to eliminate groups of people, or forcibly taking another society's land. Sounds like, on a personal level, they deserve it. They are less than human. They do not deserve my respect. They should suffer. On a national or international level, we have the right to take what we want. They are the problem, so whatever we do to them is justified. We are doing this for the good of our people. Spiritual effects. War externalizes unresolved negative thought patterns and turns resentment, entitlement, control, condemnation, and dehumanization into collective behavior. It expands the personal cycle of hurt, blame, resentment, and revenge into a pattern in which large numbers of people can be harmed, while responsibility is shifted to leaders, enemies, groups, or circumstances. When people are persuaded that others are less than human or deserving of suffering, compassion and personal responsibility are diminished. The pattern can then perpetuate itself through retaliation, inherited resentment, and continued justification of harm. Origin of pattern. At the individual level, the pattern begins with unresolved hurt and resentment, followed by thoughts that another person deserves punishment or suffering. At the collective level, these same patterns can be amplified by leaders who act from entitlement, control, and self-aggrandizement, and persuade a population to participate in the resulting conflict. The connection to thought pattern set number 7 is direct. Hurt can create blame. Blame can feed resentment. Resentment can create a desire for revenge. And when revenge is acted upon collectively, the consequences can become vastly larger. Change the pattern. Read about legacy guilt and legacy resentment. Do all the spiritual exercises in section 9. Visit Wikipedia and read about restorative justice. On the personal level, examine the thoughts that make another person seem undeserving of respect, understanding, or humanity. Identify resentment, entitlement, condemnation, and the desire for revenge before they become actions. Seek understanding. Recognize what belongs to self and what belongs to others. Release resentment, and choose responsibility rather than retaliation. Evil, core pattern. Evil is not an entity or a force. No one makes us do or not do anything. Evil is a short way to describe our cruel, mean, nasty thoughts, words, and deeds, springing from our unresolved issues and traumas. Blaming evil conveniently allows us to escape responsibility, at least as long as we are incarnated. How it manifests. Evil manifests through cruel, mean, and nasty thoughts, words, and deeds. The pattern becomes especially difficult to see when responsibility is projected onto an outside force or entity. Instead of recognizing the beliefs, thoughts, unresolved issues, and traumas behind behavior, we may describe the behavior as something caused by evil, and thereby avoid examining our own agency and choices. Sounds like, the devil made me do it. Evil made them do it. There was nothing I could do. That person is just evil. They are evil, so whatever happens to them is deserved. Spiritual effects. Calling harmful behavior evil can obscure the thought patterns and unresolved issues behind it. When evil is treated as an external force that acts upon us, responsibility and agency can be displaced. This can make it harder to examine the beliefs, emotions, wounds, and choices that produce the behavior. Labeling another person as simply evil can also reinforce condemnation and dehumanization. The pattern can therefore connect with the same cycle identified in thought pattern, set number 7. Blame can replace understanding, resentment can deepen, and the desire for punishment can replace responsibility and healing. Origin of pattern. The pattern identifies unresolved issues and traumas as the source from which cruel, mean, and nasty thoughts, words, and deeds can spring. The pattern is strengthened when responsibility is assigned to an outside force, rather than recognized as belonging to the person making the choices. Change the pattern. Examine the thoughts, beliefs, unresolved issues, and traumas beneath cruel, mean, or nasty behavior, rather than assigning responsibility to an outside force. Return to the principles of number 7. Distinguish responsibility from blame. Recognize that each person is responsible for their own choices. Seek understanding, release resentment, and choose different thoughts and actions. Practice asking, what did I say or do to create this situation? And what unresolved issue or belief is contributing to this thought or behavior? Remember, recognizing responsibility does not require condemnation. It creates the possibility of learning, change, and greater freedom. The relationship, how these thought patterns connect. War and evil can be understood as larger expressions of the same thought patterns explored in thought pattern set number 7. Unresolved hurt can become blame. Blame can become resentment. Resentment can create a desire for revenge or punishment. When these thoughts are acted upon, they can become spite, coercion, cruelty, and collective violence. When responsibility is denied, evil can become a convenient explanation that places the cause outside ourselves. The healing direction remains the same. Seek truth and understanding. Recognize responsibility accurately. Refuse to dehumanize. Release resentment. And choose actions that do not continue the cycle of harm. The core pattern and what's really happening. At its core, this group of thought patterns reflects our relationship with responsibility, hurt, and our own agency. When blame and resentment govern our choices, we remain focused on the past. We may carry too much responsibility or too little. We refresh old emotional pain, and we can lose sight of our own agency. But when we seek understanding, recognize responsibility accurately, and release resentment, we create the possibility of choosing differently. We can refuse to dehumanize. We can allow others to be responsible for their choices. We can establish boundaries when needed, and we can reclaim our freedom to choose what happens next. The healing truth. War says, they deserve it. Truth says, I can recognize harmful behavior without dehumanizing the person. Entitlement says, we have the right to take what we want. Truth says, I can recognize what I want without believing I'm entitled to violate others. Resentment says, they deserve to suffer. Truth says, I can acknowledge hurt without choosing retaliation. Evil says, something outside of me made me do it. Truth says, I am responsible for my choices. Condemnation says, that person is just evil. Truth says, I can recognize harmful choices without surrendering understanding, responsibility, or compassion. As resentment is released, understanding becomes possible. As understanding grows, responsibility becomes clearer. As responsibility becomes clearer, agency returns. And as agency returns, we become freer to choose thoughts and actions that do not continue the cycle of harm.